More than 1 billion people around the world are disabled. That's about 15% of the world's population. Here in the United States alone, about 61 million, or roughly 1 out of every 4 American adults, live with a disability. In other words, it's probably safe to say that you know someone with a disability or might be disabled yourself. But here's the thing. As common as disability is, not many people are comfortable knowing what to say or how to interact with disabled people.
To so many people, it remains a mystery. It remains this scary and overwhelming topic. It's taboo. We don't talk about it. But it's just something that's part of what makes people who they are.
That's Emily Ladau, a disability rights activist. She's the author of the book, Demystifying Disability, What to Know, What to Say, and How to Be an Ally. In her book, Emily writes frankly about disability, ableism, and allyship. But she's careful about speaking for the entire disabled community.
Community is a challenging word when it comes to disability because it's challenging to encompass everybody's experiences under one umbrella.
To help us begin to understand disability, Emily has come up with a very specific metaphor.
A pizza. No two pizzas are alike, and each pizza has its own set of toppings, and each of those toppings are different circumstances, different parts of our culture, different parts of what makes us who we are. And I know it might sound silly or reductive, but I use that metaphor very intentionally because I want to take away that sense of taboo that is so often associated with disability.
This episode of Life Kit, Demystifying Disability, things we can learn, say, and do to make the world a more accessible and inclusive place for us all.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Aspiration. Now you can help combat climate change with Aspiration Zero, the credit card that rewards you for going carbon neutral. Plant a tree every time you swipe and earn 1% cash back every month that you reach carbon zero. Aspiration Zero. One card, zero carbon footprint. Visit aspiration.com/credit to learn more. The Aspiration Zero MasterCard is issued by Beneficial State Bank, member FDIC, pursuant to license by MasterCard International, Incorporated. This message comes from NPR sponsor Burrow, a new kind of furniture company whose goal is to rid furniture shopping of all the frustration it used to cause. That's why every Burrow order ships free. Get $75 off at burrow.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Home Instead. When you become a Home Instead caregiver, you get a flexible schedule and personal benefits with a job that feels like home. Become a caregiver and make a difference. Apply at homeinstead.com/NPR.
Your book, it's titled Demystifying Disability. Why do we need to demystify disability? And I guess the more important question is, could you define disability for me? What does that mean for you?
To me, disability is quite simply a natural part of the human experience. And so there is no singular definition that can be used. But at the end of the day, I just describe it as part of what makes someone a human being. And unfortunately, that's not how everybody understands disability because we've been socialized to think about it as this deeply negative and shameful thing.
Right. You emphasize that no two disabilities, no two people are alike. This sort of one-size-doesn't-fit-all model. Just between you and your mom, you've experienced this, right?
100%. So my mom has the same disability that I do, as does her younger brother, my uncle. It's a genetic disability called Larson syndrome, and it's pretty rare. And it's even more rare to have multiple people in the same family who have it, although it is something that can get passed on from generation to generation, but it manifests differently in different people. So even within our own family, we are a microcosm of what it means to have a diversity of experiences with one disability.
The history of the disability movement is pretty long, right? And you start at the turn of the century, kind of in the 1900s. I know this might be a tough task to ask you, but could you give me a big, broad rundown of this history? I'm particularly curious and interested about the history that we might not have learned in typical American schools.
The first thing I like to remind people about disability history is that all of human history is disability history, but we ignore that part of our history. And in fact, it's not at all taught in most schools. And so that leads to us being socialized to think that disability is something that either simply does not exist or doesn't matter, or we shouldn't talk about it. But that couldn't be further from the truth. And ultimately, I decided to start talking about disability at the turn of the 20th century because that's when a lot of the momentum picked up that ultimately shaped the way that I live today. And at the turn of the 20th century, disability history was mired in this awful eugenics mindset. There was this belief that disabled people should not reproduce, this belief that disabled people did not belong in the world. And that mindset is not something that's gone away, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic and conversations around healthcare rationing. And so, unfortunately, and probably largely because we've not learned it in classrooms, history tends to repeat itself. But for me, a broad overview of disability history shifts into this building civil rights movement and this sense of pride and this sense of, hey, we also belong. We also have a right to access the world around us, to full and equal participation and opportunity.